Hi everyone, and welcome to our November speaker series. I'm Charlotte, Head of Charity Partnerships here at In-Kind Direct. We've got a great panel of speakers again today, and we're talking about profit with purpose, which is why with a very hard 2020 we're coming to an end, product giving is even more important in these challenging times. So we've just launched here at In-Kind Direct our Christmas with Kindness campaign, and that's getting the most needed gifts to people this year. So we know 70% of the organisations we support are prioritising simply just keeping people safe and clean this winter. That means more toiletries, cleaning supplies and period products, but the need for treats, toys, tech and activities to keep people entertained and connected is hugely important as well. So giving safety, dignity and care is at the heart of our campaign, and we're helping the charities, community groups, food banks and schools that we work with to support twice as many people each week. So please do visit our website, of course, after this event to find out more information about the campaign. Also want to thank the generosity of our corporate partners. We've had a great supply of products and we know how needed there are. We're running some stats this morning, and in the 3 weeks of November so far, we've sent out over 1,000 more orders in the same 3 weeks last year. So we know this Christmas is looking harder for people. And as more people are affected by the pandemic, we can work together to ease that pressure that so many people are feeling right now. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce us to our 3 great speakers today. And the screen will flick across to them so they can wave and say hello as well. So first we've got Morgan Breswick, who is Policy and Partnerships Officer at the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, with a particular focus on work and employment. Our second speaker is Matt Stone, who's Marketing Director of Family Care UK and Ireland at Kimberly-Clark. And we've also got Safi Tuckfield, who's one of the founders of Peak Empower, a charity that supports those that are experiencing social isolation in Milton Keynes and Northamptonshire. And throughout this, we've got a series of questions we're going to run through with our speakers. And if you've got any questions of your own, do put them into the chat box. If you can indicate who they're for, that makes my job a whole lot easier. And then we'll get to them when we can at the end of the session. So I'm going to go straight on to our first question. So, of course, when I flick over to you guys, do introduce yourselves a bit more than I've done, say hello to everyone. But the first question for everyone is, Christmas is a month away today, and we all know that the pandemic and the lockdown measures mean we're all preparing differently this year. So for your organisation, what's the biggest difference this year? And I'm going to go over to Morgan first.
Brilliant, thanks Charlotte. Hi everyone, I'm Morgan and I work for the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, as Charlotte said, and we are a social change organisation focused on solving poverty, and we work across 3 policy areas, so housing, social security and work, and we're really keen to build public and political understanding of what poverty looks and feels like in the UK at the moment. From JRF's perspective, moving into Christmas, we are continuing to highlight and try and build our understanding of the experience of people in poverty and how the pandemic is hitting them, potentially pulling people into poverty who hadn't experienced it before, and to continue to push for the policies that we really want to see government bringing in, firstly around kind of immediate emergency support, so things like keeping the £20 lifeline that we've seen added to universal credit, and looking forward to the longer term, how can we build back an economy that works for all of us, whether that's creating good jobs, supporting people into work, or making sure people have access to secure and affordable housing. I'll hand back to Charlotte.
Brilliant, thanks Morgan, that's really helpful. And over to Safi now.
Hi, I'm Safi. I'm a co-founder of a charity called Peak Empower, who help people who are socially isolated for a range of different reasons, whether that's relating to physical, mental health, gender, or financial reasons. We normally at this time of year would be winding down and getting ready for our own Christmases, but due to the pandemic, we've had to adapt really quickly to everybody's needs, and it's sort of grown from the summer to more and more people who need help, who perhaps don't know how to ask for it or have never had to ask for help before, finding themselves that they're in this grey area of not being eligible for benefits, but because they've been furloughed, their financial status that has gone down, and not being able to afford those things that they could easily afford before. So we are now sort of doing more projects than we've ever done, trying to support more and more people. We've sort of grown from only supporting probably about 200 people this time last year to, nearly 4,000 people, which is a huge increase. And that's with people that we've had to turn away as well. So we're doing the most that we've had sort of people from social services, from other small groups, from church groups, sort of approach us. So it's actually supporting other volunteers and other charities who haven't been lucky enough to be able to be financially supported at this time as well. It's been a shame because we've been unable to use our volunteers as we would normally because of the restriction on bubbles. So there is a lot of pressure on the volunteer sector to kind of fill this gap that is missing and that the council and the government have kind of missed. So that'll be a very, very busy Christmas and New Year for us. Back to you, Charlotte.
Brilliant, thanks, Safi. And I think that's a really important point about volunteering as well, and then the kind of the double whammy for local charities in particular of trying to do more, but with more restrictions on how they can work. So I think that's a really key point. And Matt, over to you, same question. How are you preparing differently this year?
Yeah, thanks, Charlotte. Hi, everyone. My name's Matt Stone, so I'm the marketing director at Kimberly-Clark, leading our family care business. So that means I have the privilege, I guess, of being the guardian of some well-loved brands like Andrex and Kleenex. And I guess working on family care, unsurprisingly, we spend a lot of time thinking about families, both from a business and a personal perspective. And, you know, from a KC family, I think, you know, dealing with uncertainty has probably been the biggest challenge recently, and will continue to be the challenge over Christmas. You know, I'm sitting here at home, but actually the vast majority of our colleagues are still in our mills. You know, our operations continually happen 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So for those colleagues, navigating through ever-changing guardrails, restrictions, and their own personal, you know, kind of challenges is obviously pretty tricky. So keeping those colleagues safe so they can do the essential work and get our essential products out to the whole of the UK has obviously been more challenging than normal. You know, and I think that's the same for me personally. You know, I've unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but it's my birthday, my wife's birthday, and my daughter's birthday within 2 weeks leading up to Christmas. So trying to navigate, yeah, not very well planned, trying to navigate the purchasing of presents and things like that in the uncertain times is a bit of a challenge. But yeah, I guess that's been the biggest thing, is the uncertainty.
Brilliant. Thanks, Matt. No, I think that's absolutely spot on. And I think, as you say, you've touched on that when we talk about people who benefit from charity, people who are employed in the organisations that are supporting charities like In Kind Direct, it's all people, and most people are being affected, and it's about the different impacts that people are feeling. I'm not going to comment on the planning of birthday setups, but I think you're absolutely right. And certainly we've seen that, and we've heard that from our network as well, thinking about, like, yeah, birthdays, Christmas doesn't stop for a pandemic. People still need to have that bit of joy, and even more so at this time of year, and with birthdays this year, I think. So I think that segues me perfectly into my first question for Morgan as well. So thanks again, Matt. So the research from Joseph Rowntree Foundation that you've been doing across this year, it suggests that 1 in 8 people could be unemployed by the end of the year. And that means, as we've said, poverty isn't something that happens to other people, and hardship isn't something that happens to other people. So what are you seeing across the country now, and how are you expecting it to affect people into 2021 as well?
Thanks, Charlotte. Yeah, the headline absolutely is that poverty was something actually that was impacting significant numbers of us before the pandemic, and it's something that's being exacerbated by the pressures that people are feeling on family incomes, household incomes. And again, the headline is that the crisis is falling hardest on people who were in poverty or close to poverty before it hit. Just to talk briefly about the kind of context of the labour market that the pandemic has kind of come into, looking particularly at security for workers, we know that 1 in 8 workers were in poverty before the crisis, and that was a kind of mixture of factors playing into that, which were both the challenge in people accessing the number of working hours that they needed to make ends meet, but also really positive action that we saw around things like raising the national minimum wage being eaten up by costs of living and by things like the benefit freeze. So even before the pandemic hit, we were in the situation of record high employment, but real insecurity for a lot of workers in terms of unpredictable pay, unpredictable hours. potentially having employment status which doesn't give you many rights, and that was having particularly challenging impacts of people in low paid work where there was a real concentration of insecurity, and that was then having a real impact not only on people and their finances and the pressures they were experiencing, but on employers, because it was leading to real challenges around productivity growth in the UK labour market. Then when the pandemic hit, it essentially has fallen hardest on people already experiencing poverty and insecurity in the labour market. So we know if we look at sector that there's been a really big knock-on on workers in low wage sectors like accommodation, catering, retail. We've done some analysis of people whose jobs are at particularly high risk, and we know that you're at high risk of losing your job or having already lost it if you're in a non-key worker role but you work really closely with people, say you work in a cafe or you work in retail, and the kind of brunt of that is falling on people who were at high risk of in-work poverty before the crisis, so single parents, disabled people, people from certain ethnic minority groups who were more likely to be experiencing in-work poverty. If we look in a bit more detail at work JRF has done around that job risk, people are more likely to be low paid. So about 40% of people earning minimum wage are at high risk of losing their job, which is really significant. And that compares to less than 1% of people who are earning about 40 grand a year. So there's a real disparity in terms of your income and your risk of losing work because of the pandemic. If we look at other demographics, we know women are at particularly high risk, people who have a work limiting disability, workers in the youngest age group, so 16 to 24-year-olds, and some ethnic minority groups of workers, so for example Bangladeshi or Pakistani workers, who are also facing that double whammy of additional health risk as well as job risk. We also know that some places are harder hit than others. So some were weaker economies when going into COVID. They might have had a higher share of, for example, tourism or manufacturing that's taken a hit. But then other places that had quite strong economies, like larger cities, will also have seen a knock-on effect in, for example, the drop in kind of commuting that people have been talking about in the news and how that's impacting on service industries. And from some research that we did speaking to families as well, who were claiming universal credit or child tax credit, we know that the crisis has led to 10 families saying they're cutting back on essentials, 6 in 10 saying they're borrowing money, and 5 in 10, or more than 5 in 10 saying they're behind on rent and essential bills. So when we're looking forward into the impacts next year, not just that people have already experienced, but that they are experiencing, and that kind of huge uncertainty that Matt was talking about, a challenge is really to look at how do we protect people's incomes at the moment, so things like the Universal Credit Lifeline and maintaining that, making sure that we all have access to that kind of safety net of social security that we need, but then really thinking ahead about how do we create new jobs where other ones are kind of dropping away, and how do we support people with really targeted policies to make sure that they have access to that good work, and that we do build an economy in the recovery that essentially works for all of us. So I'll hand back to Charlotte. Thanks.
Wow, thank you, Morgan. I think that summary, it really does kind of give a lot more explanation, I think, than most people have probably heard before on the real breadth of the impact of the things like of things that are happening in the crisis. And I think a couple of the key things you touched on, I wasn't aware of that stat that 40% of people on minimum wage are more likely to lose their jobs. I hadn't twigged that at all. And I think, as you say, that then we talk about people being pushed into crisis through the pandemic, you start to see where those real spots in society are likely to be. And also, as you say, that interplay between the increased demand that charities in big cities and other areas are going to be facing at the same time as companies are adapting to changes in commuting, to office hours, etc. That interplay between what companies are experiencing and how charities are having to respond. And that's something, I mean, yeah, hugely biased, but with In-Kind Direct, that's where we sit, is in that spot between companies and between charities and communities. So that's a really interesting piece. And looking ahead to next year, I think you're absolutely right. That piece around sustainable job building is something that's going to have a huge impact on the people that are being supported and that need products, but also the companies that we're working with here, and I know other charities work with, to make that bridge between the two sectors. So I think, thank you so much. It's really insightful, and it also kind of again beautifully leads me on to my question for Matt. So just to give a bit of a broad outline, In-Kind Direct and the Kimberly-Clark family have worked together pretty much for In-Kind Direct's whole life of almost 25 years. And Kimberly-Clark has regularly donated a whole range of products that sit across a lot of our kind of core most needed areas, whether that's toilet roll, nappies, tissues, wipes, that really kind of underpin a lot of that keeping people clean, safe and well, which is the heartbeat really of what In-Kind Direct does. And this year we've worked together on some really exciting specific brand campaigns, working with Andrex on the Share a Square campaign, which was a kind of a joint social media and toilet roll donation, which was phenomenal. Also the Huggies Buy One Gift One campaign, and more recently the Kleenex campaign. So I'm not going to step on Matt's toes and go into too much detail, but my question for Matt is, so given the challenges of increased demand that have been caused particularly earlier in the year by panic buying or stockpiling at different points, at a time when brands are also dealing with their own supply chain challenges and the growing demand and ensuring that supply for retailers, we'd love you to tell us why it was so important for Kimberly-Clark to continue donating those essential products to us.
Yeah, thanks, Charlotte. It's a really good question, and to be honest, it's a question I wouldn't have begrudged my colleagues in supply chain asking. You know, as we tried to organise the biggest charitable donation we've ever made in the middle of the biggest surge in demand we've ever seen in the 75 years of Andrex. But I think really interestingly and quite amazingly, really, nobody did ask that in KC. You know, nobody in our company asked whether we should give away 1 million toilet rolls, as you mentioned, or 700,000 training or bedwetting pants. Instead, actually, everyone just asked how we could and found a way. And I honestly believe it comes down to kind of three main things, really. I think the first thing is, it is in our company's DNA. So for those of you that don't know, our company vision is to lead the world in essentials for a better life. And if you think about it, actually, this pandemic's probably just reinforced how essential our products really are. Sometimes actually the threat of having something taken away from you is the thing you need to realise just how essential they are in your life. And we saw that at the start of this pandemic. You know, ultimately feeling clean is when you've been to the toilet is a fundamental need that Andrex delivers. Feeling protected from vulnerability is why Kleenex was invented in the first place, and you know, being able to protect your baby and their delicate skin is really a parental instinct that a lot of our brands like Huggies and Dry Nights kind of help enable. So when the threat of those products not being available surfaced, as you mentioned, Charlotte, we saw really high levels of panic buying across our brands and ultimately really high levels of concern when people were faced with empty shelves. And our role really was to focus on ensuring consumers continued to kind of have access to those essential products so that we could just make lives a little bit better, which is ultimately, you know, what the whole of our vision is. That kind of led to, I guess, a really stressful and tough period, particularly for my colleagues in manufacturing and supply chain and sales, who honestly work really kind of tirelessly to find ways to get products on shelves. But I think importantly, you know, we're a company that wants everyone to have access to our essential products. We're pretty privileged really that every single day between 1 and 2 billion people will use a Kimberly-Clark product. But that comes with a real responsibility. So for some, access meant they couldn't buy our products temporarily on shelves in stores, but for many, access meant that they simply couldn't afford to buy anymore. You know, and as Morgan said far more eloquently and passionately than I can, a lot of people have been really hit hard by this pandemic. So really, we kind of said, if we really want to ensure that everyone has access to our essentials, just restocking shelves isn't enough, which kind of leads on to the second reason that we continue to donate and actually increased our charitable donation through in-kind. And it's because it's just the right thing to do. You know, I say this personally, but I guess I'm sure none of my colleagues would disagree that the thought of, you know, an elderly member of the community not being able to get hold of toilet roll, but also not being able to leave the house is a pretty gut-wrenching thought. Or, you know, as a parent of a small girl myself, the thought of a mother or father having to make a choice between buying food or buying nappies for their baby, it's not a choice anyone should have to make. But as we said, that's kind of the reality, and increasingly is becoming the reality. So really, in that context, it's kind of the easiest decision to make. You know, if we want to live our values and our vision and on a personal level feel like we're making a difference, it doesn't take a lot of persuading. But I think really importantly, and I guess the last point is, just because the motivation is there within our organisation, it doesn't make it easy. You know, getting essential products to the most vulnerable in our communities, whilst dealing with the highest spike of demand in our history, is pretty hard to get your head around. So really, the third reason we do it is actually because of the great work that people like In-Kind Direct and the charities that you guys work with do in making it actually really easy for us to get our products to the most vulnerable. You know, and I don't think that should be underestimated. Having a network that allows big brands and companies to reach people in communities without that infrastructure or that determination from the guys on this call today, we'd be pretty helpless, and it would be a hell of a lot harder to do. So I guess, you know, kind of taking this opportunity really to say thank you to In-Kind Direct and the charities you work with, because you actually get the products that we make to those in need. So really important. So I guess just in summary, you know, we're a company that has making lives better hardwired into our DNA. We're an organisation that just wants to do the right thing for people, but importantly, we have partners that actually make it happen, and they're the reasons why it's you know, pretty obvious, pretty easy, but really important that we keep doing it. Back to you, Charlotte.
Brilliant. Thank you, Matt. That was a brilliant summary, and yes, huge thanks back to Kimberly-Clark as well for that ongoing support. As you say, we in Kind Direct stands here to try and make it as easy as possible, but similarly we need brands like Kimberly-Clark and like Andrex and Kleenex to take that plunge. And as you say, it's part of your vision as a brand, and that's something we've really seen come through the crisis, which is something that as a charity we're looking to continue into next year, is really making that connection between what people and communities and families need and the visions and the aspirations of the brands that we're working with. And when you can kind of connect those dots, as you say, hopefully we make it as easy as possible to actually deliver that impact and as you say, ultimately get the essentials where they're needed. So no, thank you so much, Matt. It was a really great and rounded response. And I think also just picking up on your point of kind of thinking about how we can help others. I think that was one of the things, particularly on the Huggies campaign, that I really loved this year, because it was a way for families who could access products. By purchasing through you, there was an extra donation made to us to get to a family that couldn't afford to access them. So it was a real kind of way for charities, for companies and for individuals to work and get the products where they were needed. So I think that was something that really resonated with me. I'm just going to move on to now. So another question, this is to Safi at Peak Empower. So Peak Empower, obviously doing great work across Milton Keynes and Northampton, and you've joined us this year, and it's been a pleasure working with you. And you've recently launched your Christmas gift project, which is all about delivering Santa sacks as early gifts to local people. Just love you to tell us how you kind of decided on that initiative and the difference those gifts are going to make to the people you're working with.
Thank you. We've had to adapt. Every month has been a different set of rules. It's been a different sort of highlighting of different groups of people that needed our help. You know, during the summer, you know, as we all know, just like Matt was saying, you know, it was more about the essentials and the toilet rolls. I mean, I can just one lady that we delivered to that struck me, stayed with me, was she wasn't old. She was in her 30s. Heart problem. She got a little girl. She couldn't get out. We delivered toilet rolls to her and a food package. She'd been living on ketchup sandwiches, and they were using, you know, birthday serviettes as their toilet roll. And if somebody hadn't have referred her to us, she'd be in that situation for I don't know how long. So, you know, we're very thankful for the things that In Kind were able to give us. And as sort of the years progressed, it's gotten more and more about families being financially worried about Christmas and having that high level of anxiety over can they afford Christmas presents. A lot of parents saying, you know, we're not going to buy for each other, but can we at least afford something for our children? And we kind of, in hindsight, had an idea that this was going to be a problem. So we kind of started stockpiling back in summer anything that we thought would be useful, toys, you know, waterproof jackets, scarves, anything that we could kind of envision that people might like. And then obviously also there's the more luxury products, you know, like the sort of the different hair care sets, the makeup, nail varnish, sort of all sorts of things. And we put out a call just before the last lockdown, asking people what they wanted, and we kind of gave a basic list, and we were inundated. We had over 400 families contact us, and a lot of it was parents just asking for one toy or one book or something for a child. It was nothing, they didn't even want anything for themselves. So we did make a point that we, you know, everybody got something. We put a few extra bits and pieces in, and again, like you're saying about birthdays, a lot of people saying, you know, I've got a lot of birthdays this time of year as well. I can't afford for my 6-year-old to have their birthday. So that's how we decided that we were going to concentrate on those kind of products, and it sort of went from that to us then realizing that for a lot of people this year, it's going to be their first Christmas on their own because they've lost a partner through this pandemic. And that, you know, again, I'm completely unsure about bubbles, who you can be with, who you can't be with. So again, we've now expanded that to include Christmas food hampers, which we're giving out in the 20th of November. Everybody's coming to a community centre. We've got over 100 families coming to pick up all the essentials, as well as a few sort of luxury bits and pieces. And again, we'll have a lot of products that we've got from In Kind there on the day, and say to them, you know, if there's anything else you need, especially the cleaning products and the hand sanitizers, you know, any PPE, take it all. So they will come in and take as much as is humanly possible. Even Christmas trees, you know, we've sort of had people have Christmas trees because it's their first Christmas, as we were helping people who are in sheltered accommodation because they've sort of come out of abusive relationships. And it's great that the council's able to house them, but if you've ever seen these flats, they're completely empty. They don't have, half of them don't have light bulbs, they don't have toilet seats, they have nothing. So for us to be able to give them anything that can help them feel like they are at home this Christmas, and that they can feel that they're not alone. And it's been quite interesting for us because a lot of the grassroots organisations understand exactly what we're doing and why we're doing it. And we were asked by the National Emergency Trust why we thought it was suitable to give sort of makeup and nail varnish to people, and they felt that it was not a necessity. And they completely missed the point that it's not actually about what you give, it's about somebody feeling that somebody hasn't forgotten them, that they've been given something. And especially with regards to some of the individual toiletry products, and so you sort of saying about staying clean, you know, we worked very closely with the hospital, our local hospital, because they would normally have families and friends coming to visit people on the stroke ward, on the maternity ward, in ICU, who would provide toiletry packs to family members. And obviously they couldn't come in and visit their family. The same with the care homes, they would normally have things provided by family members. There was no one to provide those. So, you know, we were able to kind of take in loads of different products and say, you know, please distribute these to this ward, to that ward. So again, it's just, it's the amount of, I'd hate to think how much we've spent actually, but it's the amount of products we've managed to get has been so diverse and has been so special for so many different types of people, from someone very, very young who's just come out of the foster care system to somebody who has been, you know, made redundant, to the elderly who, unfortunately, if you hit 70, you perhaps laid off from work a little bit earlier than you might have been expected. So we've kind of had a whole range of people that we've been able to help that we wouldn't have been able to without In Kind and without organisations donating to you guys. We wouldn't have been able to do what we did. And I mean, this year alone, you know, we've helped over 4,000 people and counting. And for us, there's sort of 4 of us that work here, so that's quite a lot of people for just us. But you know, for the larger organisations, I should imagine you've helped even more people, but you've made a big impact and a big change and a big difference to those in Northamptonshire that we've been able to help and Milton Keynes. So thank you very much. Back to you, Charlotte.
Brilliant, thanks, Safi. And yeah, just to hear firsthand the people that you're working with, some of those stories, I think when we speak to other companies and when we're working with our network, that's what really kind of brings it to life and stops it being theory or policy or conversation, is that this is actually the impact it's having. And I think picking up on that point about what is a life's essential is a perpetual conversation here at In Kind Direct about what counts as an essential, and we would argue that it's anything that helps improve a life. It's not just about the bare minimum of surviving, it's about helping people to thrive, and that could be any number of things. And exactly as you were saying, our research in the summer backs up. I think about 70% of our network told us that having products helps people feel cared for, and that's something that is much harder to measure than how many people you've kept safe or clean or patients you've treated, and it's just as vital. And exactly as you've said, I mean, that's a phenomenal 4,000 people that you've worked with this year. I mean, that's amazing, you say, for 4 people. And again, it's something that makes me so proud to head up kind of the charity partnership side of what we do here at In Kind Direct. We've worked with about 3,000 charities this year, all doing phenomenal work, and the number of people that means you can support. But we know that the majority of our network are working with incredibly tight budgets, with incredibly small numbers of staff. So the fact that so much has been achieved this year when charities themselves have been struggling and have been hit by the pandemic. So yeah, just I think from everyone that's watching and on this call, just a massive thank you to you as well, Safi, and for all your peers across the UK who are doing so much to support people in communities. So I'm just going to move on to our last question now, which is another question background to everyone. So as I've talked about at the beginning of this, we've got our Christmas of Kindness campaign running with In Kind Direct, and it highlights the most needed gifts this year. So that's both, as we've said, essentials in the kind of the traditional sense of toilet roll and hand wash, but it is those other essentials like toys and books and gift sets that help people feel valued. So my question is, how do we keep the focus on impact, and particularly impact of products, as we go into the new year and beyond? So I'm going to pass that to Morgan first, please.
Brilliant, thanks Charlotte. That's a great question. Yeah, absolutely. Gift giving is hugely important, and as you and Safi have said, not just essentials that we need to be healthy and safe, but things that people might think of as luxuries, but which are so important to people feeling, you know, happiness and joy and dignity, not just at Christmas, but throughout the year. Hopefully we can keep kind of building on the community spirit and the sense of partnership that we've seen building, for example, between businesses and organisations like In Kind Direct and charities, and also keep understanding people's experiences and listening to them, as Safi was saying, asking people what do they need and trying to amplify the voices and experiences of people who are seeing real pressure on their incomes, and hopefully also building on the role that employers are seeing for themselves as being really core parts of communities, not just looking at profit and business, but at looking at themselves as playing a really key role in society in partnership with other organisations. I would say for employers who don't have products in kind, that they can also look at other kind of resources and skills and support to donate. Whether that's, you know, you're an accounting firm, you offer financial support and guidance to charities for things like bids making processes, which can be really tricky, whether you have space in communities that you could offer to community groups. So looking at in-kind donation alongside donating other resources and skills and time to communities. From the JRF perspective as well, we would say for employers who have been really focused on gift giving and who have seen the real increase in need and really want to act to support people in communities at the moment, to also extend that kind of reflection to themselves as employers as well, because we know employers have a huge role to play in terms of the well-being of people they employ and in tackling things like in-work poverty in their own workplaces. So whether it's something quite intuitive like paying the higher real living wage, or for employers that we understand are under real pressure at the moment, looking at improving employment practices like having more secure shifts, not cancelling shifts at last minute, offering people flexibility. These are all things that employers can be looking at as we move into the recovery to build on all the efforts around gift giving and continue giving in kind to tackle the kind of immediate need that people are experiencing, while also looking at the kind of structural role that they can play as employers in building an economy that is working for all of us. So essentially, we'd love to see employers just building on this incredibly positive role, and all of us, you know, charities, think tanks, employers, people who are really brokering those relationships and partnerships, continuing to work together to tackle these real challenges around poverty, and also to keep amplifying the voices and experiences of people who are experiencing it, so we can keep feeding that up to policymakers and making sure that we are understanding as a society, how are we feeling, how are we experiencing this, and what can we do as communities to support each other.
Thanks, Morgan. And yeah, that's I think some really practical steps. I think that's always really appreciated when you've had a discussion to actually get some practical pointers on what people can do differently. So Safi, going to pass it over to you as well. How do we keep the focus on impact next year?
I think that there are two things that have struck with me that haven't changed. That's people who are financially struggling. That's not going to change next year. People's mental health has been deteriorating. That's not going to change. So those are the two things that we have to kind of keep at the forefront of what we're focusing on, whether that's sort of with products that we can help increase their well-being. For us, we're running online well-being sessions throughout the whole of Christmas and New Year, using things like journaling, thought vision boards, and we're using that in conjunction with a program that we've just opened for people who have been furloughed and lost their jobs this year, to help them have new CVs, to give them support. There isn't going to be jobs at the moment. There isn't the market. It's just being honest. There may well be more jobs in the new year, but it's keeping them, keeping these people and giving them support during this period, especially over Christmas. Christmas is a wonderful time of year, but it can also have some really bad lows for people who, especially if you've been hit quite hard this year already. It's just one more hit and then you've lost your job, and then you're maybe a family member, your kids are struggling. It's just, there's been quite a lot of hits this year. So it's to keep people's mental health and keep them positive. And if we can do that in any way, whether that's, by helping them, have some bits and pieces, or, helping them with something very mundane, then we will. And that's kind of where we're focusing and working with lots of different organisations. There's so many small groups that have sort of started up, which is great. And again, it's just about linking them together, being part of that cog, and making everybody kind of work for the better outcome of everybody. So I mean, that's really where we are. Just trying to reach out and create a stronger community, really, because there are, I know it sounds awful, there have been benefits to the pandemic. People have gotten to know their neighbours. They have looked out for people. You do have this sense of community, and those are good things that would be nice to continue. I wouldn't like to see us all going back to the way things were, and not have those links with those groups that we would never have had those links with before, and being able to still provide for people who most need it. And I just think that's going to change as time goes on. It may well be a completely different group of people that need our help in January. It's just keeping an eye out on who those are, and like you were saying, being vocal, being part of any council groups, making sure that we do kind of say what's going on at grassroots levels, because I think sometimes the people higher up don't necessarily see what we see, because we're physically talking to these people. The feedback we've had from people, sort of saying, how did we manage to source these things? How have we managed to help them, and their stories? I think as long as we continue to tell those and share those, people will continue to want to help. So I think that's basically all we can do. So back to you, Charlotte.
Thanks, Safi. And I think, there was a comment in the middle about, we're just going to keep on supporting our community, as though that was just a really small thing that anyone could do. And I think it's massively downplaying the role that organisations like yours have, because that's what's kept a lot of things going, as you said, has inspired that sense of community. And I think you're absolutely right. The storytelling aspect that we all do is so important in getting those stories into the right ears to be able to actually make a change. So I think that's absolutely fundamental. And just lastly, just back over to you, Matt, in terms of keeping impact into next year. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first thing to say is that essentials aren't seasonal. So, you know, I think Christmas is a heightened point and a heightened moment, and Safi talked about it a lot there, but the reality is that every single day people need essentials. So I think that's an important one. I'll try and answer the question through the lens of I guess a big corporation that has to make money and has to give, you know, deliver for shareholders and all that kind of stuff, because I think sometimes there's a bit of a tension between making money and doing the right thing, and I really don't think there needs to be. The reality is that, you know, things sometimes take a back seat at the expense of business realities. So I kind of like to think of it and encourage brands and businesses to think about how you can leverage what you're doing for business benefit as well as benefiting the people and communities, because that's how it's going to sustain over time. There's a phrase we use in KC quite a lot, which is doing well by doing good. And the idea is that if you do the right thing morally, ethically, and the right thing for your communities, it will resonate with the consumers that you're actually trying to engage, who will reward you with their loyalty by buying the brand. And the important thing is that becomes a sustainable loop. So the more good you do, the better chance you have of connecting with consumers, which gives you a stronger business platform to keep doing the right things. So, you know, I don't think there has to be a tension. I just think it's how you think about it and how you make sure that you leverage it in the right way so that you can keep sustaining it. So, you know, I think the other thing I think that's really important to think through a brand and a business lens is, now more than ever and ever increasingly, consumers expect big companies and brands to just do the right thing. It's not a nice to have, it's an ever increasing part of a purchase choice, and consumers will vote with their wallets and with their feet. So ultimately, simply saying the right things as a brand isn't enough. You have to be doing the right things, and if you do that, consumers will trust you and stay loyal. And that's kind of the other reason, is doing something once is a gesture, consistently doing it is a trustworthy foundation of who you are, which consumers will resonate. So, you know, I'm not saying in any way that Kimberly-Clark, by the way, is perfect, and there's a lot more that we can, should, and definitely will do. But part of the reason why we work with In Kind for over 20 years now is that we don't believe it's a gesture, it's a fundamental part of what we do. And I do think that's a big part of why our brands, you know, brands like Andrex and Kleenex are so well trusted in the UK, is that consumers are rewarding us with their loyalty because they can see us doing a good thing. So I guess from a brand point of view, thinking about these kind of partnerships as a long partnership is the right thing to do. It's a great way to connect and gain trust for your consumers, and therefore it's kind of really a competitive advantage that you can leverage to ensure it becomes a sustainable part of what you do, and not just a one-off that takes a backseat when commercial realities take over.
Fantastic, thanks, Matt. And I think, yeah, that's so insightful. And as you say, it's that long-term support that moves it from being a gesture. And that phrase you used of doing well by doing good is absolutely fantastic. I feel, yeah, we should just have that and just we'll all go away and have a cup of tea, and we'll just leave that out there, because I think that really sums up a lot of what we've been talking about today. So thank you so much. And yeah, so we always hope these sorts of events and these sorts of conversations will inspire other brands to see what's possible. And I think, as the work you've talked through already on the call of what you've been able to do with us in the 20+ years you've been working with us, really kind of embeds that. So thank you. So that's the end of our kind of formal questions, for want of a better phrase. So I'm going to move across and have a look at some of the questions that have been coming in. And thank you to everyone who's given me a name to go by. I'm going to work through, I think we've probably got time for maybe one question each, so I'm going to pick those up. The very first one that's come through hasn't got a name attached to it, so I'm actually going to pick this up myself and then see if anyone else wants to come in. If they can give me a wave of the hand behind the scenes, that would be great. So the first question that came in right at the start was, we know product giving can play an important role in ameliorating the effects of poverty, especially so in the pandemic. Can it also have a role to play in addressing the causes of poverty, and how? And yeah, I think that's a really good question, which I'll just try and skim across quickly, because that's a big part of my of our work here in Kind Direct, thinking that through. Absolutely, a lot of what we've talked about is, once people are in that situation, how products can help them. But there is a huge piece in Kind Direct's model and the way we work, in that we support that infrastructure of local organisations. So the products that we distribute out support the charities and the community groups and the food banks, as well as the people that they're working with. So things like office supplies, stationery, occasional furniture, white goods, appliances, as well as hand wash and all the kind of consumer consumables that are needed in residential services, for example, all support and keep those costs down for charities so they can free up that funding on the stuff that they don't want to be spending their fundraised income on, and they can spend it on delivering their frontline services. And those frontline services and the products that are used in those services help support counselling sessions, mother and baby groups, people to find employment, people to upskill. So there's a whole role for products throughout the whole process, from supporting the organisations, delivery of the services, and then just simply being given to the people who can't access or afford them. So I think products have a role to play the whole way through. So I don't know if Safi or Morgan or Matt want to come in on that at all, or whether that's kind of rounded out, hopefully given an answer. Brilliant. I'm getting lots of nods behind the scenes, so I'm going to move on. So I've got a question here for Safi, which is just simply, I think you've touched on it a bit, but just is there just a real specific wish list of which products do you really need at the moment, coming into the end of the year and going into next? If you've got the ear of companies hopefully on the call, what's needed?
Gosh, for us, there's a big emphasis on children. So there's, I'd say toys, but it's not really toys. From your list of products, it's quite funny. We're able to pick out quite a lot of things that are very, very useful for people who have children with sensory needs. And from that, we've then put together autism-friendly packs. And that's a huge thing. There's a lot of people that have children who have additional needs that haven't been going to school because they're either vulnerable or they live with somebody who's vulnerable, and they've obviously been off for quite a long time. They're now being home educated, so maybe a parent has had to give up a job. I mean, I know in Northamptonshire we've got over 1,000 children who are now being homeschooled, and of those 90% are those with additional needs. So to keep them entertained, it's sort of craft packs. The spirographs went down a storm, the light up spinners, even sort of the glitter pens, the things like that I think I just ordered this week. There's some colouring in pages, but they're great for people who have sensory needs because they can calm them down. So it's looking at things slightly outside of the box. So it's those kind of products that can be put together. And then for us, there's also a big amount or a large amount of people who, and again, like saying it's not just about essentials over Christmas, who have very small children or who are pregnant at the moment and are very, very worried about how they're going to be able to afford their child because, they perhaps got pregnant before the pandemic or, right at the beginning, and they weren't expecting things to go on this far, or they've been furloughed. And again, we've been able to put together sort of baby packs with the cleaning products, the nappies, all sorts of bits and pieces like that. So for us, it's those kind of products are really the essential things that you can have all year round, but right now are also really good for people at this time of year who are worrying. I mean, the skip hop stuff that was on recently, I think I pretty much ordered every single thing. It became addictive at one point. I think InKind is an addictive website for me. I'm on there every day. I'm like, what can I do today? Oh, we've got the Christmas books on today. We'll have those. And we're always doing toilet rolls and cleaning products because, again, people are very much aware of cleanliness at the moment. I don't think I've ever seen as many people clean their houses from top to bottom. If they'd like to come round to mine, I wish someone would clean mine. So again, it's those it's more the essential products that we're kind of seeing people want more and more and more. So those are would be, if I had a wish list, those would be kind of my wish list. Yeah, that would be great. Although I can't have another storage locker. My whole house has become a storage locker.
Brilliant, thanks.
So that would be great.
That's really helpful. And I think you're right, touching on that mix of the essentials, keeping clean and safe, and also those other items that you talked through. And I think hearing about how those products are actually used, again, I think it brings it to life for people. These aren't just products, and their value is so much more than their price point. It brings so much more to people. So Morgan, I've got a question for you, and I think you've kind of touched on it in other places, but if there's anything you just want to add through. So what do you think really are going to be those key challenges for households next year? What's kind of the summary there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the kind of overview of it is twofold. So first, there's just the immediate income pressure that people are facing from furlough, from losing their jobs, and we really need to have policy making targeted at how do you give people that really immediate support. So as I said before, really looking to government to keep the £20 that they've added onto universal credit, which has been a really essential lifeline for people, and we want to just see added permanently, extend that to people who are on legacy benefits, so everyone is accessing that same lifeline, and use that as really immediate support for families, for children. And then we need this next stage, which is looking at where jobs have been lost. What opportunities are there to create new good quality jobs, and how do you connect people with them, with the skills and the training that they need to actually move into those jobs, and make sure that this time around, because in the last recession, understandably, there's this focus on quantity of jobs, less so sometimes on quality because of the pressures of recession, and that led to some of the challenges in work that we saw leading up to the pandemic. And so we really want people to be going into good quality work that's really providing security, and making sure that they do have that support in a really timely and tailored way, because if you're out of work, we know that can have a scarring impact on your ability to move into employment quickly. So just making sure that all of those bits of, employment support, job creation are lined up and work really well for people who need to access them and are potentially worried about getting work next year.
Brilliant, thanks Morgan. And I think you're right, I think that brings together a lot of what we've been talking about. It's about connecting the dots. It's not about each person doing their one bit in isolation. It's about how it works together. So no, I think that absolutely, yeah, agree with everything you said there. And I've got one last question now, so going over to Matt. And again, I promise I didn't sneak out and post this. Someone genuinely asked this question. What recommendations do you have for other brands or companies who are looking to join in Kind Direct's network and set up a partnership around product donation?
What a great question someone else asked. Yeah, I think maybe two things. I think the first thing kind of links back to some of the stuff I talked about with Kimberly-Clark is I would encourage people to think about how it fits with or complements what your company does and what it stands for, because I think then it stops being a choice and starts being a strategy. And I think it's really important. If I think about our company, everyone in the UK needs toilet rolls. So that means in theory we could go and spend our time in so many different places and choose different things here and there, but linking it back to what we offer and what we do and what we stand for makes it pretty obvious, and therefore makes it sustainable and meaningful, and all that kind of thing. And I think the second thing is to also think about the benefits from a company perspective. Employee engagement's really important. And so for our colleagues to feel like they're part of a company that's doing something that can really help others is probably more rewarding than anything else we could offer them in terms of employee engagement, because we're all human beings. So, I think there are more benefits beyond knowing you've done the right thing that companies should think about, but it needs to fit with what they do. Otherwise, it's always just a choice.
Brilliant, thank you, Matt. And I think, yeah, again, that soundbite there of it stops being a choice, it starts being a strategy. I think that's something we're really keen when we think about how In Kind Direct will keep moving into next year and beyond, is how you turn that from a one-off into something that's more sustainable. So I really appreciate that. I think we're kind of coming to the end of our time now. So I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone that's joined us, and particularly to our speakers, Morgan, Safi and Matt. Really insightful conversation and some great questions coming through on the Q&A as well. So this is actually our last event of the year. We've done, I think, four of these now each month, and we're going to go away and have a think about how we run these sorts of events into next year. So my plea as well as go and take a look at our website and the websites of all the speakers here and understand what we're all doing, how we're working together, and particularly our Christmas of Kindness campaign. Is you will get a link through in the email after this event asking for a bit of feedback on what you found useful, what you'd like to see us talking about next. So any insight you can offer would be great, and that will help us in our planning for next year as well. But for now, I'll just say a massive thank you to everyone who's joined us today, and in a month's time, have a lovely Christmas.